Ever heard that saying, love is a battlefield? Well, get ready because today we are diving into a legal case that takes that saying to a whole new level.
Oh, yeah.
It's a story of romance, a hefty diamond ring, a broken engagement, and a court battle that ended up redefining how the law looks at relationships.
Really fascinating stuff.
Exactly. And you know what's so interesting about this case is how it shines a light on this whole concept of conditional gifts in the eyes of the law and how our changing societal norms around relationships are influencing these legal decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're talking about the case of Bruce Johnson and Caroline Settino, which went all the way to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court.
Oh.
It all started with a whirlwind romance. Picture this: Bruce and Caroline fall head over heels jetting off to romantic destinations like the Virgin Islands.
Nice.
Italy, Bruce is showering Caroline with gifts, a classic fairy tale beginning right.
It certainly seems that way. But as we'll see, those gifts, especially the ones given with marriage in mind, become a major point of contention later on. Legally speaking, these are what we call conditional gifts. Presents given with a specific condition in mind, like, say, a marriage actually happened.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit.
Sure.
So if the marriage doesn't happen, the gift giver can ask for the gift back.
Precisely. Like an unspoken agreement. I'm giving you this, with the understanding that we'll be getting married.
Yeah.
If that condition isn't met, the gift in theory should be returned.
Wow, that's a fascinating legal concept. I bet a lot of our listeners have never even considered this before. But back to the lovebirds. The romance continues. Bruce proposes with a dazzling $70,000 diamond ring.
Ooh,
At a swanky Cape Cod restaurant, everyone's ecstatic. They pick out wedding bands, set a date. Everything seems picture perfect.
Until it's not.
Yeah.
That's where things take a dramatic turn.
Right. According to Bruce, Caroline's behavior started to shift.
Oh.
He felt she was becoming increasingly critical and, well, just not the supportive partner he thought she was.
Mm-hmm.
But the real bombshell came when Bruce stumbled upon a suggestive text message on Caroline's phone, leading him to believe she might be having an affair.
Oh, no.
So this is where the legal waters get a bit murky.
Yeah.
To what extent can mere suspicion, even if later proven wrong, justify breaking off an engagement? That's a key question the courts had to grapple with.
A big one.
Absolutely. Driven by his suspicions, Bruce ended the engagement. Caroline was heartbroken naturally and held onto the engagement ring, and one of the wedding bands, Bruce, feeling that his suspicions justified his actions, decided to take her to court to get the rings back.
Wow, so it went to court.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting. The trial judge initially sided with Caroline. The judge ruled that Bruce was at fault for breaking off the engagement based on a mistaken belief, and therefore he wasn't entitled to the ring back. Classic, he said, she said, and the court had to determine who was to blame. But wait, there's a twist. The appeals court overturned that decision. They argued that simply ending an engagement doesn't automatically equal fault. They introduced a justification analysis, essentially weighing whether Bruce's actions were reasonable given his suspicions.
Interesting.
They concluded that they were and said he should get the ring back.
Okay.
This decision highlights how legal interpretations of fault in broken engagements are evolving.
For sure.
It's not simply about who said it's over, but whether there were valid reasons for doing so.
Right.
Okay, so it's not just black and white. There's some legal gray area here. But are you ready for the real game changer? The Supreme Judicial Court, the highest court in Massachusetts, made a groundbreaking decision. They decided to completely dish the whole fault concept altogether.
Whoa.
This was a significant shift from previous rulings. The court recognized that trying to pinpoint blame in a breakup is incredibly tricky. Plus, it doesn't really align with the realities of modern relationships or with the principles behind no-fault divorce, which is the standard in many states, including Massachusetts. So they basically said, let's start playing the blame game.
Exactly.
The court stated that engagement rings are essentially conditional gifts, given with the understanding that the marriage will happen.
Makes sense.
So no marriage, no ring case closed. It seems like this decision could prevent a lot of messy post-breakup arguments. No more dissecting who messed up. It's a clear-cut condition.
Usually.
Precisely. This reflects a broader shift in how the law views relationships. It's moving away from placing blame and toward a more practical and equitable approach.
I agree.
That makes a lot of sense. But hold on, there's another layer to this story. Remember those gifts we talked about earlier? Well, there was one more gift involved, but it wasn't a necklace or a fancy vacation.
Yeah.
It was dental implant surgery.
Wow.
Before the engagement went south, Bruce had promised to pay for Caroline's dental procedure, and she had already undergone the first part, which involves some, shall we say, unpleasant tooth extractions. This brings up an interesting point about promises made within a relationship that are not directly tied to the marriage itself. In this instance, the court upheld Bruce's obligation to pay for the rest of Caroline's dental work, even though the engagement was off. They viewed it as a separate agreement made before the breakup.
Interesting.
So even though he got the ring back, he wasn't entirely off the hook financially.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that even in the whirlwind of romance, the words we speak and the promises we make can have serious legal ramifications.
For sure, for sure.
Absolutely. The court's decision in this case carefully balanced the conditional nature of the engagement ring with the enforceability of a separate pre-existing agreement. It's a nuanced ruling that sets a valuable precedent for similar situations.
Agreed.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. It seems like love and law don't always see eye to eye. Sometimes a simple I do or I don't can lead to some pretty complex legal battles.
Excellent.
Well, we've certainly had our minds blown open with this one, but there's so much more to unpack. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the broader implications of this case and what it means for couples navigating the often choppy waters of premarital commitments. We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Welcome back. We've been dissecting this fascinating legal case, and I have to say it's really making me rethink those impulse purchases I make for loved ones.
Well, maybe hold off on buying that diamond-encrusted cat collar until after the wedding vows are exchanged, just to be safe.
Right.
But in all seriousness, the court's emphasis on engagement rings being conditional gifts really does simplify things, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It eliminates the need to play the blame game and offers a clear-cut solution. No wedding, no ring. But what really intrigues me is the potential ripple effect of this decision. Does this mean other pre-wedding gifts could be considered conditional as well? What about that fancy espresso machine I bought my partner last year?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The court focused specifically on engagement rings, recognizing their unique symbolic significance as a promise of marriage. Other gifts, like that espresso machine, might fall into a gray area.
So a weekend getaway or a designer handbag wouldn't necessarily fall under the same conditional gift umbrella.
It's not so clear-cut. The court's ruling doesn't explicitly address other types of gifts. It will likely take future cases to truly define the boundaries of what constitutes a conditional gift in the context of a relationship.
This is where things could get really complicated. Imagine trying to categorize every gift exchange during a relationship and trying to figure out if there was an implied marriage condition attached to it.
It definitely highlights the need for clear communication between couples, maybe even written agreements, especially when significant assets or financial commitments are involved. I know it's not the most romantic conversation to have, but it could prevent major headaches and legal battles later on.
Agreed. It's not exactly the kind of conversation you want to have over a candlelit dinner. But it could save a lot of heartache and legal fees in the long run. So while this ruling provides much-needed clarity on the fate of engagement rings, it also opens up a whole new set of questions about other premarital gifts. It's like a legal puzzle with some missing pieces.
It certainly is. But this legal evolution reflects the changing dynamics of relationships and how the legal system is trying to keep pace.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the broader implications of this case. It seems to signal a move away from this whole concept of fault in relationship breakdowns.
Absolutely. The court's decision to reject a fault-based approach for the engagement ring aligns perfectly with the principles behind no-fault divorce, which has become the norm in many parts of the U.S.
So instead of punishing someone for messing up, the focus is on finding a practical and equitable solution.
Precisely. It's a recognition that relationships are complex, and assigning blame doesn't always lead to the best outcome, especially when dividing property.
It definitely feels like a more mature and realistic way to handle things, especially given how difficult it can be to unravel the reasons behind a breakup.
I agree. This approach is likely to have a ripple effect on other areas of family law, too, leading to less adversarial processes for resolving disputes.
It seems like a win-win for anyone who wants to avoid those lengthy and often emotionally draining legal battles. But before we get too carried away with the no-fault philosophy, let's circle back to the counterclaim, in this case, the dental implant surgery. That adds a whole other layer of complexity, doesn't it?
It does. The court acknowledged that Bruce's promise to pay for Caroline's dental procedure was a separate agreement, independent of the engagement. It was a pre-existing obligation that he had to honor, even though the relationship ended.
So even though he got the ring back, he still had a financial responsibility stemming from a promise he made before the breakup. It's a stark reminder that our words carry weight even in the context of a romantic relationship.
Absolutely. It showcases how the court carefully considered all angles of this case, balancing the conditional nature of the engagement ring with the binding nature of a separate pre-existing agreement. It's a nuanced ruling that sets a valuable precedent for similar situations down the road.
This whole case is like a masterclass in legal disentanglement. But let's take a moment to consider what this no-fault approach could mean beyond engagement rings. Could this philosophy start to influence other aspects of relationship breakdowns?
That's a thought-provoking question. The trend of no-fault divorce already exists, and this case could be a sign of things to come in other areas of family law.
It makes you wonder if we're moving toward a future where fault becomes less relevant in all sorts of legal matters, not just those dealing with love and marriage. It's a fascinating possibility, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, let's bring it back to Bruce and Caroline and recap what we've learned from their saga and what it means for our listeners.
All right, so we've made it to the end of our journey through this captivating case. It's been a wild ride, hasn't it? Diamonds, dental implants.
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster, that's for sure.
Uh,
What started as a simple dispute over a broken engagement and a pretty pricey ring has opened up this whole Pandora's box of legal questions and how societal views on relationships are shaping the law.
Absolutely. So let's break down those key takeaways for our listeners.
Okay, sounds good.
First off, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court made it crystal clear. Engagement rings are officially conditional gifts. The condition. Marriage. If there's no wedding, the ring goes back. No blame game, no courtroom drama.
It definitely makes things simpler, wouldn't you say? No need for courts to get into the nitty-gritty of why the relationship ended. Just a practical solution based on whether the marriage happened or not.
Exactly. No more fighting it out in court over broken hearts. It's refreshingly straightforward.
For sure. And I think it encourages couples to think more practically about these situations, too.
Right. And the second takeaway, well, this case really highlights this growing trend towards a no-fault approach when relationships end.
Yeah.
We already see this with no-fault divorce laws, and now this ruling extends that idea to broken engagements.
Totally. It recognizes that relationships are messy. You can't always point the finger at one person. And when it comes to dividing property, that blame game doesn't always lead to the best outcome.
It just feels like a more mature way to handle things, and realistic too, considering how hard it can be to really understand why a relationship falls apart.
I agree. And I think we'll see this approach influencing other areas of family law as well.
Yeah, less time in court, more focus on finding solutions.
Exactly.
And lastly, let's not forget about Bruce's agreement to pay for Caroline's dental work. Even though they weren't getting married, the court upheld his financial obligation because it was a promise he made before the breakup.
That's a good reminder that even in the heat of the moment, the promises we make can have legal weight.
Absolutely. So it seems like the days of those long, drawn-out legal battles over broken engagements might be coming to an end, at least in Massachusetts.
It seems so. And it suggests a broader shift towards a less blame-focused approach to relationship breakdowns.
But I think the most important takeaway for everyone listening is this: open and honest communication is key, especially when it comes to finances. It might not be the most romantic thing to talk about, but it can prevent a lot of headaches down the line.
I'd say it's an investment in a healthy relationship.
Well said. Well, we've reached the end of our deep dive into this case. But before we go, we want to leave you with something to think about. If engagement rings are conditional gifts, what about all those other gifts couples give each other? Where do we draw the line?
That's a good question to consider. I think this case gives us a good starting point for thinking about those more complicated situations.
And that's it for today. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.